Thank you for joining City of Atlanta Short-Term Rental License webinar. Today we will be doing a short-term rental affidavit review. In this webinar, we will cover all short-term rental affidavits. We will review the STR Agent Authorization Affidavit, STR Primary Residence Homeowners Affidavit, STR Homeowners Affidavit for the long-term tenant, STR Homeowners Affidavit for additional dwelling unit, STR Entity Owners Affidavit for primary residence, and lastly, the STR Homeowners Entity Ownership Affidavit for additional dwelling unit. Before we review the short-term rental affidavits, I want to let you know where you can find the different affidavits. If you visit the STR webpage, scroll down, you will see affidavit, and there you will see 6 different affidavits that may be used for your scenario. Here's the STR Agent Authorization Affidavit. The applicant that should utilize this particular document will be the owner or long-term tenant. Who can be the STR agent? The owner of a short-term rental unit shall designate an STR agent on the application for a STRL. An STR owner, the owner's tenant, or another owner authorized individual may also serve as a short-term rental agent per Section 20-1006A. If the owner or long-term tenant will serve as the STR agent, the affidavit is still needed. As you can see, these are the different areas that will need to be filled out on this affidavit. Input your name if you are the owner or long-term tenant. Input the name of the individual that will be the STR agent, owner, long-term tenant, or designated person. Input address of the STR. Input the owner or long-term tenant signature. Input date. Input the owner contact information. Input the STR agent contact information. And this is where the notary would sign. STR Primary Residence Homeowners Affidavit Form. This affidavit is used when the applicant is the owner. The affidavit is needed to prove the dwelling unit is the homeowner's primary residence. Let's fill out the document. Select the application type, whether it's a new application or renewal. Insert the STRL number, and this is for renewals. Input county. Input homeowner's name. Input the address of your primary residence. Input homeowner signature, and this section below is for the notary. STR Long-Term Tenant Affidavit Form. This affidavit is needed when the applicant is the long-term tenant. Affidavit is needed to 1. Prove the owner grants the long-term tenant permission to utilize the dwelling unit as a STR. 2. To prove the dwelling unit is a long-term tenant's primary residence. Let's fill out the application. Select application type. Either it's a new application or renewal. Insert STRL number, and this is for renewals. Input county. Input homeowner's name. Input the address of the primary residence for the long-term tenant. Input the name of the long-term tenant. Input homeowner signature, and below is for the notary. STR Additional Dwelling Unit Homeowners Affidavit Form. This affidavit is used by either a homeowner or long-term tenant that wants to add on an additional dwelling unit to their short-term rental license application. Please note, you must first register your City of Atlanta primary residence. Please do not create 2 separate STRL applications for the primary residence and the additional dwelling unit. The additional dwelling unit is associated with the STRL that includes the primary residence. During the application process, you will be asked if you have a second dwelling unit. At that time, enter the address of the additional unit. Let's fill out the document. Select application type, whether it's a new application or renewal. Insert STRL number, and this is for renewals. Input county. Input homeowner's name. Input address of the additional dwelling unit. Input name of the owner or long-term tenant. Input homeowner's signature. And below is for the notary. STR Primary Residence Entity Ownership Affidavit Form. This particular affidavit is used when the entity is applying. The affidavit is needed when an entity owns a dwelling unit. The individual that is a part or full owner of the entity must prove the entity-owned home is their primary residence, must provide documents listed below to prove ownership in the entity. We'll need a certificate of organization of the entity, current annual registration of the entity, and the deed must show the entity as the owner. Let's fill out the document. Select application type, new application or renewal. Insert STRL number, and this is for renewals. Input county. Input name of the individual, a part of the entity that resides in the dwelling unit as their primary residence. Input entity name. Address of dwelling unit owned by the entity. Input name of the individual, a part of the entity that resides in the dwelling unit as their primary residence, same name as listed above. Input signature of part or full owner of the entity. And below is a section for the notary. STRadditional Dwelling Unit Entity Ownership Affidavit Form. This affidavit is needed when the applicant is the entity and the entity wants to add on an additional dwelling unit owned by the entity to the STRL. Please do not create two separate STR applications for the primary residence and the additional dwelling unit. The entity additional dwelling unit is associated with the STRL that includes the primary residence. During the application process, you will be asked if you have a second dwelling unit. At that time, enter the address of the additional unit. Please note, the deed must show the entity is the owner. Let's fill out the document. Select application type, new application or renewal. Insert the STRL number, this is for renewals. Input county. Input name of the individual that is a part of the entity. Input entity name. Input address of the additional dwelling unit owned by the entity. Input signature of part or full owner of the entity. And below is the section for the notary. Affidavit tips. Please refer to the STRL Required Document Summary on the STR webpage to understand what affidavits are needed per your scenario. Write information and signature clearly on the affidavit. The notary seal should be visible and not faint. Please advise the notary that the document will be uploaded electronically. Complete the affidavit fully and ensure the notary stamp is not expired. If you have any questions regarding STR regulations or the affidavits that were discussed in this webinar, please contact us at 404-546-7990 or via email str@atlantag.gov. In addition, please connect with us on all of our social media accounts to stay up to date on any STR news. Thank you for joining.